Welcome, everybody. One of my favorite stories about transitions and big changes is about the introduction of the car more than 100 years ago. Back then, Henry Ford was one of the first ones to switch from a horse carriage to a horse carriage with an engine. Remember? And actually, the first car still looked like a horse carriage. With us today is Adrian Swinscoe. And I'd like to hear from Adrian where we are in the transition when it comes to, for example, the way we treat customers and think about customers. Talking about the transition nowadays, everybody's talking about technology, and we should talk about technology and AG and AI and whatnot. But how do we actually treat our customers? Are we still in the age of the horse carriage? Are we gradually switching to the horse carriage with an engine? Are we a little further along, the old Chevys and maybe even Tesla? So I'd like to hear from Adrian Swinscoe about it. Please introduce yourself briefly, Adrian. You wrote 2 books. Show them to us so the people know what you've been talking about, what you've been writing. And let's say do a 15-minute introduction, then we have a little chat. Floor is yours, Adrian.
Thank you,
and
Charles.
Thank you for being us. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Charles, for that introduction. And I'll show you the books in a second. And I love the kind of content that we've heard about before. People talking about technology, people talking about platforms and ecosystems, and you talked about AR and IR and VR and all these different sort of things, and it's all fascinating. But yes, we are talking about customer experience and what the kind of where the game has shifted to. And I think we now talking about, rather than talking about customer experience, we need to talk about experience leadership. Because I think that's a bigger game. And I think if you allow me, I'll tell you a bit of a backstory to that, how I got to that, and it'll bring in the books and everything else. So the backstory to it is that, and this is where I met Rob, shortly after I published this book called Punk CX back in sort of May, June, kind of 2019, I met Rob. He asked me to come. He saw the book and he was like, "Oh my God, come and talk at API days." And we ended up having a rare old time. I remember kind of like being on stage and getting everybody on in the audience to pull their punk face and stick their fingers up to the camera. I have a picture of that. It's beautiful. I think people kind of loved it because it'd never been done before. In fact, I'd never tried it before, but it was a kind of cool kind of moment. But the story about the Punk CX is that it was born, the idea was born back in December 2017. And it was born out of frustration because I remember speaking to a friend of mine, Oshin, and we're both in sort of in the experience space, and I was excited by the level of activity and enthusiasm and movement and things in that whole customer service, customer experience sort of space. But I was frustrated about how much significant improvement there had been to outcomes. Were we as customers getting better service or better experiences? And I was frustrated that actually that didn't seem to be the case. And then I started thinking about it a bit more. And when I was talking to Oshin, I sort of like, out of frustration, I blurted out, "Oh, I wish somebody would do something a bit more punk, almost to move the dial, as it were." And I thought about that. We were drinking Guinness at the time, and it's not great for memory. It's a really nice kind of like occasion, but I promptly forgot that idea. And then it popped back into my head a few months later, and then I started thinking about it. I'm a fan of punk music, so I was thinking about it, and I was thinking, let's think about punk. Where does punk come from? Now, punk exploded out of the back of progressive rock in the 1970s. Now, regardless of whether you're a fan of progressive rock, you have to concede that it was quite self-indulgent, very interested in its own virtuosity and musicality and all these different sort of things, and got accused in many parts of being guilty of disappearing up its own backside, right? And punk took this attitude to be like, we want to take a DIY, democratic, back to basics approach. Like anybody can pitch in and have a go. Dare to be different, all about heart and emotion. And I love that because it is an open sort of thing. And I thought about the experience space, and it struck me that the experience space then and still now exhibits similar characteristics as to prog rock in the 1970s. It's potentially overly codified, certified, benchmarked, metriced, frameworked, yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. And if that's true, then what would a punk version of CX look like? And that was the frame behind this whole book. And it was styled around, so we wrote it and we go like, well, if you want to write something which is punk based, you can't write 50,000 words of black ink on white paper because that's just not very punk, right? So you have to write something which is, in line with that. So we wrote something which was very much track inspired by album based. So it's very visual. So it's all very kind of short and to the point, very punchy. And that was a challenge for people to do better work, to be better, to be more creative in order to drive these better outcomes that we're all looking for. So that was back in sort of 2019, and the book landed. It finds its own audience. It's not for everybody. It makes some people a bit uncomfortable, kind of so on and so forth. And that's fine. But then the pandemic arrived and everything changed. And what was fascinating, that in May of 2020, a friend of mine, Joel, sent me an email. He said, and they were right in the midst of the first sort of like set of lockdowns. A friend Joel can turn around and he said, it's amazing to see how much punk CX is going on. And what he meant by that was how everybody was forced to strip things back to their core essence and focus on doing the things that they had to do and getting them done quickly. Things, we talked about the acceleration that's taken place over the course of the last 18, 20 months. Things that would normally have taken 5 or 6 years to get done in an enterprise sense have sometimes taken kind of like 5 months or 5 weeks to get done because people just stripped away all the crap and just focus on getting stuff done. And so I thought that was a fascinating time. It was, it was worrying, kind of, there was a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, a lot of concern going on around by that time. But I was watching as well about all these things going on. And it felt like there was like tectonic plates moving in that whole experience domain. And it struck me middle of last year that we talk about customer experience, we talk about employee experience, we talk about other things. But actually, it seemed to me that there's this quadfurcation and beyond going on with the experience. I looked the word up. It is a word, quadfurcation. People are more familiar with bifurcation, but there's a trifurcation and a quadfurcation, and then there's kind of, you can just keep going. And what I mean by that is that actually I think experience is starting to be kind of, the domain is starting to split into customer experience, employee experience, there's the stakeholder stuff, and then there's also this thing around the experience of the leader or leadership experience as being that connective tissue that pulls everything together and orchestrates the parts. And so I think all this stuff has been emerging over the last couple of years now, and it's been driven by the pandemic, the acceleration of all these different trends in the pandemics. I mean, you fold in remote work and hybrid ways of working and technology, distributed technology, and all these different sort of things and platforms, and it's been we've been forced down this route. But like we kind of say was that in terms of creativity, the worst thing you can do to a creative or a designer is give them a blank sheet of paper. Because creativity, the best creativity is driven by constraints. And what the pandemic has done is put constraints on us and forced us to change things, and sometimes rapidly. And so with all this sort of stuff that's been going on, I don't think it's sufficient any longer to talk about customer and employee experience as being separate things. And I think we need to talk about experience in the round. Because we talk a lot about market leadership. We talk a lot about brand leadership. We talk about business leadership. We talk about team leadership, technological leadership, all these different sort of things, even, all these different things. But I actually don't think that we talk about experience leadership and what that means and what it means to at all these different kind of levels, because ultimately that's what we aspire to. Those are the kind of that's the position that we all want to kind of reach, particularly if we're going to deliver the outcomes and reach the heights that we all desire. So I started thinking about that, actually. I started thinking about it, and funnily enough, I started thinking about that over the course of the last year, but then started really working on what that kind of meant, or what I thought that meant over the course of this year. And I'm happy to say that if this is the first album, then the second album has just come out, and it looks like this. So they're like cousins. Ho ho. And so Punks XL is a new book which is like its predecessor, like Punks X, is composed of a series of short and punchy tracks, which is organized loosely around a series of concentric rings or dimensions, which looks at this experience leadership frame from an individual, a team, an organization, a customer, and then kind of beyond, to try and look at all of that. And when I was first thinking about it, first conceiving the idea, the thing that was in the back of my mind was, oh my God, second album syndrome. What if it's not as good as the first one? And I was like, oh no. And so I was like going, oh. And then I thought, I don't know if I have all the answers kind of here. And I don't even know if I've got some of the answers. So I'm like going, oh, what if I make this kind of bigger and better, kind of in different ways? And so I borrowed an idea from R&B and hip hop albums, where they kind of introduce new artists. You have X track featuring Y artist. So I said, let's see if we can do that. We can assemble a whole bunch of collaborators, different voices from around the world that understand what we're trying to do and what we're trying to talk about and buy into it, but can add depth and perspective and flavor and ideas and creativity and knowledge and experience to that kind of like frame. So I've been able to assemble, and you can see it on the bottom. You can hear it. Like there's all these kind of names. These are the collaborators kind of on the book. They look like this. Ta-da! This is the collaborator kind of like page for the book. And so we've got 12 different people that have contributed a number of different tracks. And they've ranged from San Francisco in the US, the west coast of the US, all the way through the East Coast to the UK, to Spain, to the Emirates, all the way out to Colombo in Sri Lanka. So I think we've covered quite a bit. We've put our arms around. I don't think we've got our arms around all the way around the world, but we've got quite a good reach. And the idea is that we wanted just to explore what this kind of means, but not necessarily to provide or to come up with any answers. But like Punks EX is almost to create an invite or a challenge or a poke to say, come on, people, you need to think about this differently, more holistically, more broad ranging, if you want to succeed. And because it's a collaborative effort, I'm sort of pleased to say that we decided that we're going to do the whole thing for charity as well. And we're going to do it for these folks. So Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders. And the reason why I decided that we should do it that way is because it's a collaborative nature of the collaborative effort, but also in acknowledgement of all the stuff that we've gone through, that many people have gone through, people are still going through, and that many people will continue to go through in the coming months, if not years. So anything we can do to that, if we give the organization a bit of visibility, and if we can raise a little bit of money for them, then that's brilliant. I think they've been doing tremendous work for the last 50 years. And so I think that we explore all sorts of different things. We use stories, we use ideas, we sort of play around. I mean, this is not just a book about leadership from a human perspective. This book touches on everything from strategy to people to process to technology. I mean, an advanced technology and where technology is kind of going. It's all there because it's all an essential part of this. But ultimately, the book, in the words of Arlo Guthrie, its role is to disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed. because I think that's what we need. It's almost like the book is about disruption of mindset and approach. There are people that are going and leading kind of in this kind of way. And we need to surface those kind of people. But we also, this book is there about saying, you're not alone, you're on the right track, keep going. But they're not in the majority. And we need to disrupt some of the people that are getting comfortable because everything feels like it's in place. And to say, no, you need to do better. The bar's just gone up and it will continue to go up. And if you haven't seen that it's gone up, and if you're not talking about things in this way and seeing that this is the way that things are going, then you're going to get left behind. So that's the role of the book. And to repeat Arlo Guthrie's famous words, when he was talking about the role of protest in folk songs, the role of folk songs in protest. He says that their role is to disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed. And that's the aspiration for this book, is to do exactly that but in this whole experience sort of space.
Thank you so much, Adrian. It's very insightful. Thank you. Picking up on this Arlo Guthrie quote, I'm a fan, actually. I play guitar and I still sing Riding on the City of New Orleans. Remember? Famous song. Good Morning, America. Give me an example of those who should be comforted, who deserve to be comforted.
So I think I'll start with the one idea is, and there's a track in the book, and it's based on this idea called the Jekyll and Hyde syndrome. Now, Jekyll and Hyde is may be familiar with from movies, but this kind of humble scientist drinks this potion, turns into this crazy man, and does kind of unspeakable, kind of evil kind of things. But I use that story as a way of helping people understand that we can sometimes view things or approach things and have like a split personalities, like not consistent, not congruent, as it were. Like, for example, we all wake up as human beings. We all wake up and we're simultaneously either working or, we're neighbors, we're friends, we're family members, we're husbands or daughters or kind of whatever it is. We're also consumers. We have these multiple personas. What I find fascinating is that you'll end up having many people that will go there'll be all these things, and they'll set high standards for what they expect out in the marketplace for when they're as a consumer, what they kind of buy, but then they will go to work or their place of work and they will cross the threshold, and then it's like, something happens. And they end up entering an organizational frame and end up doing things to customers or treating people in their organization in a way they would never find acceptable themselves. And so for me, there's a real Jekyll and Hyde syndrome. I'm asking people to look in the frame and go, am I being Mr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde? Or kind of like, or am I trying to dispel that? Am I going to be congruent across the piece? People talk about, I also get exploring the book about what does authentic really mean? People talking about authentic this and authentic that. And I'm like, I challenge some of those things because what I want to do is, asking the book, I say, look, so if I'm a jerk and I'm consistently a jerk, does that make me authentic? Question one. Question two, if I'm a jerk, but I try to be considerate, respectful, empathetic, generous, kind, does that make me inauthentic? Now, you might say that's mere wordplay, but I'm skeptical of many of these kind of like memes and kind of like bandwagons and trends and all that sort of stuff. And I want people to focus on not the labels, but the content. and see things for what they are and understand what's important to you and not try and be like anybody else, but be yourself, but be the best version of yourself that you can be. And in the words of Maya Angelou, which I use a quote of hers right at the end of the book, and I'm just going to pull it up so I get it absolutely spot on. And this is the point. It's right at the back of the book, after everything. And she said, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. So it's not asking people to be perfect, but it's asking people to open your eyes and see things for what they are, and see yourself for what you are, and see kind of how you need to improve things, whether it's a technological perspective, whether it's a people, a process, or systems, or brand, or orientation, kind of whatever it might be. Be honest about it, embrace it, step into it, because I think that's what it's going to require. This is not a magic thing. This is not overnight. This is hard work. It's always been hard work. There's no overnight add water like a pot noodle sort of thing, and like ta-da, you've got an instant kind of meal. This is not a pot noodle thing here, ladies and gentlemen. This is slow cooking.
And if you look, Adrian, at companies that are either very successful or failing companies, I mean, look at the biggest companies where you look for the market cap, like the Googles and Apples, very successful.
Yeah.
If you go a little bit back in time, you see the giants of the past, like GE or Kodak or some others, failing. Is there a relationship between how they deal with their customers, how they, work with their focus on the customer experience, where you write about so eloquently? Is there a relationship between having success or failing when it comes to the attention they give to customer experience? In other words, does a solid, good focus on customer experience, does it pay off?
Oh, I think without a doubt. So there's another idea in the book, which the title of it is "The Future of Customer Experience is Always Built in the Present." And the first time I said that to people was, and so rather the backstory to that was, I remember traveling to Barcelona for an event a number of years ago. Had an absolute nightmare getting there. Supposed to get there at 11 to speak at 9 in the morning. Ended up getting into the hotel at 4 in the morning to still speak at 9. I was kind of wired, lack of sleep, all that sort of stuff. Anyway, did the talk. It was all fine. Then my client asked me, says like, "Oh, we're going to do this panel thing later in the morning. Can you do that?" And I'm like going, "More caffeine, please." Kind of like, can we inject it into my arm? Anyway, got to the panel. I said yes, because I obviously wanted to please my client, wanted to help out. Got to the panel. I'm in there. I hadn't been prepped or anything. The MC comes to me straight away. He says like, "Look, so here's my question." He says like, "I'd like to get your perspective of where you think we're going to be in 5 years' time, vis-a-vis kind of customer experience." And he goes, "I'm going to come to Adrian first." And I'm like going, what? No prep. And I'm like, "Urgh." And in my sort of slightly sleep-addled state, so my mind's shutting down, but then still boosted by caffeine, I'm all over the place. I'm like, fuddling around. And then I kind of like just kind of blurted out. I says, "You know what? In 5 years' time," I says, "here's the thing. I believe that we will be excited about the possibilities that the future holds, but frustrated at the progress that we've made." And I think if I go 5 years on from that, the same is still true. And it sort of bounces from now into the future. But I think that when I link that back to the future of customer experiences built in the present, I think the people that lead and lead sustainably over a long time is they get two things kind of right. Is they understand that they have to be preparing for disruption and innovation. They have to do future planning. Absolutely nailed on. But too many people get lost in that. And that's the only place that their focus is, i.e. the future and disruption and things. And what they forget is that you build relationships today. You don't build them in the future, you build them today. If you don't have a relationship today, then you've got to acquire a new one tomorrow. And so this is the thing. So getting it right today, I doing the basics and the fundamentals, helping your customers, building those relationships, being great at experience in the now will give you permission to play in the future. And this is the thing that kind of there's a difference between leaders and followers. Followers are all worried about the disruption and innovation and everything else, kind of the next level. 5G, IoT, AR, kind of VR, kind of like NLU, NLG, ML, neural networks, blah, 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 all the kind of like the buzzwords, right? And that they get caught up in that, but then they take their eye off the ball in terms of what's happening here and now. Kind of like their customers and what's happening. And and some brands can have a loyalty or brand equity allows them to do that for a while. But that stuff atrophies over time as competition kind of goes up and people just get more and more sort of pissed off and be like, why are you not paying attention to us? So the leaders understand this and they do both of those things. They strike that balance, being good in the present, but also preparing ardently for the future. And then they fuse those things together. And that's how they win.
Yeah.
Adrian, I love what you're saying. And if we look back at, we've been doing SmartCom summits since the start of the pandemic. And every time we talk about technology with technologists and with leaders from technology, we end up talking about leadership and organizational models and people, right? That's the essence that we're doing at this platform. And that's also what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you look back at the pandemic years, we're also doing this interview online because it's convenient and you're in London and there's a virus out there and it's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had that conversation a couple of times in the shows that it's very efficient, right? For many people, working online is very efficient because you don't have to travel. You can just plug in at any time that works, and you can be very efficient for many roles. But we lack the creativity in many
Mm-hmm.
cases, the bonding, so people in creative roles or in business development or partnership. I mean, all this sort of stuff. It takes time. The slow cooking, right? Part of
Mm-hmm.
going to an event is listening to people talk, but the other part is hanging out and having a beer and bonding and connecting in different ways. So if you
Mm-hmm.
look at the sort of transition that we've gone through, and modern work and hybrid work is here to stay.
Mm-hmm.
What sort of what sort of challenge is there then for the people that are creating this technology, right? They're working on turning the carriage into a modern car. What sort of advice would you give there, or how should we look at that technology, the big tech companies?
So I think, I think, Rob, you're absolutely right, but that's such a huge topic. Like, how do we can replace that sort of like in-person intangibility connection thingamabob that, and it has dimensions across the piece, whether you're a customer, whether you're an employee, whether you're a leader, whether you're in innovation, creativity, whatever it might be, right? But let me kind of give you a very specific example, which is very real for people, and it's very kind of close to my heart. It's in that because in that core of customer service, right? Now, imagine you're working as in a service desk or a help desk or a contact center, right? And back in the day when everybody was in the office and say a call came in and it's a tough call, right? It could be a complaint or somebody's told you a really challenging story or whatever, and it's like, oh my god, right? What would normally happen, well, assuming that you're not in that sort of like kind of battery farm kind of like digital, pod hutch things that you're chained to your chair, but what would happen is that you end up with your teammates around you would be able to recognize that you've just had a tough call based on what you've kind of saying, kind of your mood, all these different sort of things. And it'd be quite likely if you have that sort of culture that they would look out for you and go like, "Hey, Rob, I see that call was was really tough. Why don't you kind of take 5 minutes? I'll go get yourself a cup of tea. I'll cover for you." Right? And you can't account for some of that sort of stuff. Right? But when you're working in a hybrid kind of way, it's even harder to account for that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
We have the technological capability to start thinking about kind of like how that works, where you can do real-time call recording, transcription, analytics, and then try and bump up going, oh, that was a tough call, you might take a break thing, and then you can work that into workforce management, workforce engagement kind of platforms and all that sort of stuff. But that's so leading edge kind of right now. It's just not quite kind of there yet. But that's a technical, it's a technological kind of solution. But it doesn't also give the agent or the rep the opportunity to put their hand up and go, "Excuse me, can I take 5 minutes? Because oh my god, that was tough for me." And we have to understand that there's a relative part of all of this sort of stuff. But that's why I think some of this stuff is really, really interesting. And it's not about the technology. It's also about us as people and how we use and design the technology to help us produce those outcomes. Because there's challenges there for people as well, particularly leaders, because it requires a different type of leadership. It's no coincidence that you've got many of these kind of like leaders. I would suggest that most leaders that were like a couple of months ago advocating for everybody to get back to the office were the ones that enjoy and get their energy from interacting with lots of people and seeing lots of people about. Right? Because that's about them and the locus of their energy rather than about their employees.
Mhm.
And so you end up kind of like, this is kind of where you kind of, when you start to unpeel all this stuff, it's really complicated, but like super interesting, but very hard to get right.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing, is we've come from the 19th century into the early part of, come from the 19th into the 20th and then into the early part of the 21st century. What this pandemic has done is gone, ripped up what we've done and gone, by the way, make your own model. And people are going, hang on, I was supposed to do what everybody else was supposed to be doing. And I kind of follow. Now I have to make a decision about how I want this to be as an owner or leader or kind of whatever. And some people are just like, I don't know. Because there is no certainty anymore, but there's also so many more unknowns. So I think it's fascinating. And we're only at the beginning of it. Now, I think technology will probably be in front of kind of the human capability. I think we are going to have to become more aware and then potentially choose to unlearn some stuff and then learn some new stuff in order to catch up with where technology could take us. We're going to be the ones that are probably going to be the drag on this, not technology. It's all about us and how we design things, how we address those creativity challenges, that connection challenge, all those different sort of things in a new hybrid environment. Those are the challenges. The problem is that we'll probably end up with this shifting kind of sand type of picture, this moving target. Because there's only one thing that is absolutely certain out of this whole kind of pandemic, is that another crisis will happen at some point. Whether that's health related, whether that's social disruption, political disruption, environmental, whatever it might be, something like this will happen again, probably in our lifetime. It'll be different and it might not be as global, but it'll be happening. So we have to always be ready for it. And we're not thinking about that as yet because we don't want to think about it. But it's almost, we need to build resilience into our operating kind of models and our leadership models and experience kind of models to be able to deal with all that sort of stuff. And that requires huge input from us.
I remember in your previous presentation, Adrian, you were talking about a company that decided to let go of targets, sales targets, just forget it. And I assume a lot of people are watching this who have to deal with sales targets every single day and every single year and every single quarter, right? So let go of sales targets. Come on, get real. Explain to us.
So, so that last time we talked, the company I was talking about was a company called Coventry Building Society, so a financial services organization here in the UK.
Yep.
And that's kind of what they do, and they do really well without that, because they're very focused on, they understand what they're going to do, what they want to do, and when they want to do it, and they just get completely dialed into, that's kind of how we do it. So everybody moves en masse, not as a set of different teams, but everybody's aligned going, we're charging that way. And it's interesting because in the book is like the new book, the Punk XL book, there's I was speaking to the chief customer officer, Jason Greer of Reputation. And we were talking about having a conversation about metrics and things, and what sort of metrics you should use. And he told me a story where we were talking about kind of like, he said, I like to think about it, metrics, think about it as like a dashboard. It's like a dashboard on your car, as it were. And I thought about that, and I was a bit like, I think it's a really interesting, fascinating way of looking at it. But I twisted it a little bit. And in the book, I kind of like, there's a track where I talk about like, how fast would you drive? And the idea is, imagine you're in a car, right? And there's no dashboard. And you're just driving. How fast would you drive? And why? Now, that's just like a thought experiment, right? But if you go back to those sales teams and go, oh, kind of like targets and stuff, you go like, well, if I took your targets away, how hard would you charge? Now, if you're only charging because of the targets, that's interesting, but it tells you where their motivations are, right? It's about chasing those targets. But if you took the targets off for people and understand, that driving the car, now some people go, oh, I drive, it's all dependent on, one, the type of road that you're in, the type of the car, the type of weather, all of this level of traffic, all that sort of stuff dictates how fast you drive. And my point with all of that is that we should never just take these things for granted. It's like we sometimes have to understand, is like going, what do we pick where we want to go to, and then figure out kind of where we, how we're going to get there, and what's the best way to get there, what's the kind of most aligned and most efficient and most effective kind of way of getting there, rather than just going, what's my target, and then hard charging. There's a fascinating kind of like piece of research. I was speaking to some folks across at Sugar, and they came up with, talking about the alignment between sales and marketing teams across many organizations. Here's the headline: they're not at all. In fact, they did this pulse survey that said only 2% of marketeers believe that they're actually aligned with their sales colleagues. And usually because, to your point, Charles, sales has got targets, they're going that way. Marketing has got targets, they're going that way. And they don't really kind of be. It's like, here's another mind-blowing kind of like stat. Do you know that most marketeers report they will discard 50% of the leads that are coming through from marketing?
But Adrian, there's more data available to anybody than ever before in history. Yeah. You can combine anything with the touch of a button, and you're telling me within one company they go opposite ways and there's no interconnection?
So I go back to kind of what I was saying. It's like, who's the big problem here? It's not the technology or the data, it's us. It's like, we've got all this smart technology, we've got a lot of dumb biological technology. Kind of human beings are the kind of ones that need to learn the lessons and do the ones. And this is the thing. is we've got all these incredible tools around us, but it doesn't excuse the hard work that needs to go in to design an organization, to fill an organization, to kind of like propel an organization. So if we're building a car, we're the ones that drive it, right? And so if the technology is a metaphor for the car is a metaphor for the technology, or the car is a metaphor for a business, we're the ones that drive it. And we're the ones that have to get better in order to be better drivers. And that requires us talking to kind of each other and understanding that the environment changes, our customer needs change, our employee needs kind of change. The technology can changes too, which means that we have to change. We have to understand where the problems are. We have to step into them. We have to have those difficult conversations. We have to kind of raise the bar kind of higher. We have to talk about this experienced leadership stuff. What does it mean for us? It's like, if you ask everybody and go, who do you want to be number one in your market or your field? Most people will put their hand up and go, yeah, of course. And then you ask them and go, so are you willing to do something different that might not work, that might be seen, that might be a bit of a risk in order to achieve that? And most people will say no. So then you get to the kind of point where you go, oh, so you've got all these people that want to be number one, but are not willing to do different things to achieve that. So they want to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. Is that not the definition, according to Einstein, of madness?
Probably is.
Hello? Yeah. No. Sorry. I
Sorry.
kind of like dramatic silence.
Yeah, I think in terms of time, Adrian, because we can easily talk about this for many more hours. And I'm really happy because you're going to be a regular on SmartCom, right? We talked about that before. I really look forward to additional follow-up sessions, panel sessions, and interviews with you and by you, because there's so much here to explore, right, and to discuss. And I like how we're bringing the tech companies and the non-tech thinkers together, right? Because together somehow we have to do it. A very practical final question for now. What can people do to start their slow cooking process? Everybody buy the book. Everybody buy the book. Get it on Amazon, wherever you can find it.
Yeah, it's on Amazon, around the world. So do it for me, a request. Do it for two reasons. One, because it'll help us raise some money for Doctors Without Borders, first and foremost. And two, maybe it's going to be a slow cooking recipe book. Right. And, you might not like slow cooking. It might frighten you. But hey, you never know until you kind of like if you take a spoon and have a taste. So that's the invite, as it were.
Right.
Get the book and have a taste. See what you think. And if you don't like the taste, at least you've raised some money for charity.
Yeah. Well, I remember
you can't lose.
With your previous book, I remember giving some copies away to certain people in my line of business. So that's always interesting. It makes for a great end of year gift, I would say. And I think, people can reach out to you, right, as well, if they want to dive in deeper, maybe talk about this, organize workshops and sessions, because that's what you do as well, besides writing and cooking.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'm a theoretical cook. Kind of, I'm a cook of the mind. Kind of, my culinary skills are.
Yeah, great. Well, I think it was great. I think Charles and I enjoyed this conversation a great deal, and I think we have food for thought, and we'll continue with that as soon as we can. Thank you so much, and take care over there. Good luck with the whole book.
Thank you, Adrian. I'll start reading the book today. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Rob.